Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar on county communications and media relations. This is December 10th, 2020. My name is Stephen Aquario, Executive Director of the New York State Association of Counties. And on behalf of our President, Jack Marin, from Ontario County, New York, I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time from your busy day and your busy schedules to become better educated and informed on ways to discuss county communications and media relations. Though the media landscape continues to evolve at an increasingly rapid pace, the need for continuous and consistent communication remains paramount. This webinar today will provide county officials with an overview and best practices, both for traditional media relations and the social media platforms that help county leaders better connect with residents and businesses in their communities. We'll also messaging development and how to respond to reporter questions. Today, more than ever, what we say and how we say it makes a big difference. At this time, I'd like to take a moment to recognize and thank today's sponsor, the New York State Industries for the Disabled. Maureen O'Brien, president, is today's webinar sponsor. Of course, this is the Preferred Source program established in state law to advance special social and economic goals related to the employment of New Yorkers with disabilities. This is the Preferred Source program empowers people with disabilities through job opportunities such as furniture repair, groundskeeping, industrial laundry, data entry, electronic recycling, messenger services, both foot and mobile, photocopying, temporary personnel, and much, much more. I'd like to thank the New York State Industries for the Disabled for all the great work that they do to serve local government and serve persons with disabilities. Thank you, Maureen O'Brien, for all that you do. Our speakers today come from a very experienced background in communications, and they are both sourced from the talents of our own multi-award-winning NYSAC staff. First up, NYSAC Deputy Director, Dr. Mark Levine, helps coordinate the strategic direction of the association's activities involving legislative and policy issues, educational opportunities, and member services. Previously, Mark served as the NYSAC Communication Director. Prior to NYSAC, Mark was with the Center for Technology of Government, an international research institute that fosters innovation and good governance in the use of IT in government. Mark also worked in the State Assembly as a congressional aide and a newspaper reporter in Northern New York. Mark holds a PhD and a master's degree in communications from the University at Albany and a bachelor's in English Lit from Le Moyne College. He's also an adjunct professor and is accredited in public relations. Following Mark Levine, Tom Oldfather is the communications manager for NYSAC. Prior to joining NYSAC in February of this year, Tom worked for ny.gov digital team as an interaction designer and strategist. Part of his duties included managing the ny.gov social media accounts, as well as social media accounts for state initiatives like the very popular Taste NY. Prior to this work on the digital team, Tom worked for both the State Assembly and the Executive Chamber as a communications coordinator with responsibilities ranging from drafting press releases to radio, video, and direct mail communications. A native Kansan, Tom received his Bachelor in Political Science from Kansas State University. I'd like to remind our viewers as we go through this presentation, please type any question into the question tab, not the chat tab, on the right side of your screen. Again, the question tab, and we'll pick up those questions in the order that they're received after the planned remarks during the question and answer portion of our webinar. We hope to get through today's presentation in about 1 hour. Again, thank you for being with us here today. We hope that you find this presentation helpful and useful back home. Let's go to Dr. Levine.
Thank you, Steve. Steve, it is a pleasure to help coordinate NYSAC's communication program with you and Tom Oldfather and Kate Pierce, our multimedia coordinator. 16 years ago, I sat down with Steve, who was at that time the interim executive director of NYSAC, and he hired me to be the communication director. And at that time, he gave me a blank slate. And since then, NYSAC has written thousands of press releases and advisories, held hundreds of press events, press conferences and events, and dozens of editorial board meetings throughout these last 16 years. Steve is one of the best communicators out there, and he is definitely the most knowledgeable and authoritative voices for counties in the state of New York. When you have somebody like that on your team, it is much easier for your communication team and for media relations. So thank you, Steve, for everything that you've done and you continue to do for counties and for NYSAC. It has been some time since I have been in a classroom, since anybody's been in a classroom, and a couple of years since I've taught this media relations course, but it's something that we do at NYSAC each and every day. It's like riding a bike or driving a car. You don't think about all the details until you have to teach your son or daughter how to drive right before their road test. So this is a great time for us to take a step back and to put what we do each and every day in perspective for you, our members. The better that we can all do this, communicate about the county perspective, then the easier it is for all of us to explain what counties do to the world. Next slide. Here's what we're going to cover today, this morning. County communications, a general overview of who we are and what we do. Traditional media relations, I will cover what traditional media relations is, how we work with reporters, or some tips for working with reporters, some tips for message development that you could use in your county. And then I'm going to turn it over to Tom Oldfather, who will talk about new media, social media, and how we are communicating with our constituents and with the people on different platforms now, with Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, email, our websites, and all of those different platforms. Next slide, please. If we are not defining what reality is, then somebody else is doing that defining for us. And by the way, we are all on the same team here. NYSAC and all of the counties across the state. We are all defining the county perspective by what we do, how we communicate locally, and how we interact with our constituents, our residents, our businesses, and the media back home. What do we do and who are we as counties? Right now, our number one face forwarding activity is our public health offices and fighting the COVID-19 pandemic. And we have been on the lead of this battle against COVID-19 since the middle of March. We do mental health. We provide mental health services. We've been battling the opioid crisis for years, and we have been providing other mental health services and addiction services at the local level. We process Medicaid applications, and our local revenue, taxes and sales taxes and property taxes go to fund the state and federal Medicaid program. We promote economic development and support our businesses and our communities. We have highway construction and maintenance crews. We operate 911 centers, our jails, probation offices, and we provide indigent defense services in our counties and communities across the state. We provide social services, senior services, veteran services. We run parks and recreation programs. We administer early intervention, and we fund preschool special education for the families in our neighborhoods, in our communities, in our counties. We collect property taxes and sales taxes, and those funds go to pay for state mandated programs and services, and also local discretionary quality of life programs. That's what we do. There are no shortages of things that we can talk about as we communicate what our counties do each and every day, 7 days a week. Take your pick about what you want to communicate about. A couple of years ago, NYSAC put together a report called 101 Ways That Counties Make Our Communities Better. We have lots of great stories to tell. You can use any of those documents that we have put out and adapt it locally and tell the story from your county's perspective. Next slide, please. We can tell our story on lots of platforms. And we recommend that you tell your story on as many platforms as possible. Not everybody looks at the news or gets their information from a single same platform as everybody else. There are lots of people who have cut their subscriptions to newspapers. They no longer have a daily newspaper delivered to the end of their driveway every day. They may get their news from the radio, from television, or from the internet. So our goal as communicators is to make sure we are on the platforms telling our stories on as many platforms as our audiences are on. So we should be in the newspaper, we should be on the radio, we should be on television, we should be on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and we should have a website, a forward-facing website that provides county information to the people who live in our communities. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about traditional media today. So what types of media do we have here in terms of traditional media? And also new media or social media. We have two forms: controlled media, where we have a say in what is said, how and when it is said, and uncontrolled media, where we have no direct role in the final content. What is that? So controlled media is an advertisement. We pay for an ad. It's called unearned or paid media. So you could pay for an ad on television, on the radio, or in a newspaper, or you could put out a PSA, and televisions and radio stations have a duty, an obligation to play so many PSAs per year. So a county putting out a PSA is controlling the message of what you want the audience to hear. A PSA on non-smoking, a PSA on getting your vaccine for COVID-19. NYSAC is going to be putting together a model PSA that counties can adapt locally, so you could put that out. That would be a form of controlled media. Uncontrolled media is when you put out a press release encouraging a reporter or a news outlet to cover your story, but we have no control over what the final content of that story is. When we put that press release is, the reporter or the editor picks up that press release, and he or she may take some of that information and then call another source and get another perspective on that story. So the story that is in the newspaper or on the radio or on television the next day or that evening will have multiple sources, likely, and we won't be able to control exactly what the reporter says. Some changes that have been brought along by technology, particularly in the last 10 or 20 years, are the following. Our audience have become more fragmented. What does that mean? It means, in 1 and 2, our audiences are more active, able to choose two-way communication. So our audiences are going to get information from the source that they want. Your neighbor could be watching Fox News or Spectrum, and on your right side, your neighbor on your left side could be watching the local television news station and getting a regional newspaper rather than a local newspaper. So what is it? So the audience fragments itself by what they choose to get their information from. There's less competition. When I was first a newspaper delivery boy, 12, 13, 14, I delivered the newspaper. I delivered the Watertown Daily Times in Messina, but there was another paper in Messina called the Messina Observer. And so there were two choices that people had, and sometimes the people in the community subscribed to both newspapers. And there was a competition there among reporters about covering the story better than the other newspaper. So that increased the quality of the news in both of those newspapers. When I became a reporter, I worked for the Messina Observer, and the Watertown Daily Times was still in the community. And so when I went to a school board meeting or a village board meeting or a town board meeting, there'd be a reporter there from the Watertown Times, and the two of us might sit next to each other, or we might sit in different parts of the room. And at the end of the day, we would be writing different stories, and both of us would be trying to write a better story than the other. The quality was better for both of us. And now, because of consolidation in the news media, whether that's on the newspaper or in local television broadcast news, the quality has decreased. There is no competition among local reporters in terms of multiple newspapers in a community. There may be some friendly competition between a newspaper reporter and a TV reporter or a radio reporter, but generally speaking, on the same platform, you don't have as much competition as you used to have. There's no single deadline for any specific outlet. So yes, the newspaper still goes to bed around 11:30 to be delivered and put into newsstands the next morning at 5 a.m. But the reporter who is covering that story will be tweeting throughout the day. And depending on what breaking news there is, they could be tweeting throughout the night. So there's no single deadline. It's shifting all the time. And so when you have an addition to the story or more information to the story, you can send that information along to the reporters who are working that story any time of the day. And then there are more opportunities for citizen journalists. There are individual people in their communities who are starting online blogs or online news outlets where they will take often a particular point of view and become a reporter for the news in your community on that particular point of view. Jeanette, next slide, please. Some traditional media outlets, newspapers, radio, and television. Newspapers, you have different newspapers, daily newspapers, weekly newspapers. Most are subscription based, but some are free. Your penny savers are free, and penny savers usually have some content, news content in there. They may or may not have a reporter. They may just take press releases, copy and paste them, and put them into spaces in their paper. But all of these are probably in your communities. Despite their decline in numbers in terms of subscription and eyeballs who are reading those newspapers each and every day, they remain the most influential medium. That means that folks take what's in a newspaper, believe mostly what's in a newspaper, and that the news that's in a newspaper is the news that's shared most often in your communities. Newspaper reporters are under tremendous pressure to produce content for multiple channels and more content than ever before. What does that mean? The newsrooms are smaller, there are fewer reporters, and they have to be tweeting and posting on Facebook throughout the day. So you may have a reporter today that has to do 3 or 4 stories. So they're writing and talking with individuals and tweeting throughout the day. There's just a tremendous amount of pressure on newspaper reporters. So it's good to keep in mind as you're working with them. Different types of radio in terms of getting the story out there for your county. There's talk radio, public radio, and other formats with news on the hour. In Albany, we have 1 and 2 very popular talk radio programs that host local government officials on a regular basis and business officials, and they will talk to them on a daily basis. Public radio in the capital region, we have one of the largest public radio stations in the state, with a footprint that goes from Westchester to the North Country. And so it covers a lot of counties. Their footprint covers a lot of counties. Then you have music genre format radio that may have a news director that covers multiple radio stations, and they offer news on the hour and on the half hour. So at 10:30, there'll be a 2-minute news broadcast segment, and at 11 o'clock, there'll be another one. And oftentimes they will just read what's in the newspaper or read what's coming across the wire during that time. And then you have local broadcast and cable news. In New York, we have Spectrum News, a 24/7 news channel. And we have local broadcasts, which are your local NBC, CBS, ABC, and Fox affiliates, who have local broadcasts at 5, at 6, at 11, maybe noon, maybe 7 a.m. And so they are looking for news content for those times that they are providing local news. Next slide, please, Jeanette. What do media companies care about? It's important for us to take a step back as we're trying to tell the story of what county governments do through these traditional media outlets. What do they care about? They care about ads and eyeballs. What does that mean? They care about staying in business, making a profit, and making a difference. So how do they do that? They do that through two ways. They make advertising revenue and subscription revenue. That's what keeps them in business. That is what makes them a profit. That is what pays the bills for them and allows them to hire a new staff. Ads and eyeballs. So the more subscriptions they have, the more that they can charge advertisers in your local community, or the more advertisers want to be in that newspaper. In the last 10, 20 years, as you've seen the decline in newspaper subscriptions, you have also seen advertisers who traditionally have advertised in newspapers go elsewhere. That's why newspapers have been pinched in terms of revenue, in terms of profit making, and they've cut back their newsrooms because they're not seeing the revenue that they used to see when their newspapers were in more hands each and every day. But what will drive subscriptions and advertisements is news. So if a newspaper, a radio station, or a television station has news, they will attract the eyeballs. And once they attract the eyeballs or subscriptions or listeners, then they can charge for advertisers and they can charge for underwriters. So a few years ago, I attended a workshop that presented news in this way. News is what is new and what is newsworthy. What does that mean? When an editor makes a decision, or a news director or an assignment editor makes a decision in the morning about where to send their reporters for the day, they'll look at a stack of advisories or news releases, and they will determine what they think is new, what happened today, or what's going to happen today that wasn't happening yesterday, and what is newsworthy, which means what are the things that our community residents, the readers of our newspaper, the listeners of our radio programs, and the viewers of our local TV station, what is newsworthy to them? What do they need to know today and tomorrow that they didn't know before? COVID-19, that is news. It's new and newsworthy. So what you're seeing in the newspaper every day and at the top of the news hour on television news are the new positive cases of COVID-19, new hospitalizations, the numbers in the ICU units, the deaths. We are seeing county leaders on the front page of the newspaper each and every day. We are new, and we are newsworthy, or we are reporting what is new and newsworthy to the outlets that are talking to residents and New Yorkers across the state each and every day. Okay, Jeanette, next slide. So what's in our media relations toolbox? Press releases, news media advisories or news advisories, press conferences, media events, op-eds, letters to the editor, and editorial board meetings, and leave behind packets, primarily for those press events, media events, and editorial board meetings. You want to leave behind a packet of information so that after you go, the reporters and the editors can look at that information to get more facts and more details. Next slide, please. So for releases and advisories, you want to focus on the hook. What is new and what is newsworthy? That's your hook. It should be in your email subject, just a couple of words in your email subject, and then a few more words in your title, and then a few more words in your introduction. You need to explain to the reporter what is new and what is newsworthy here. And the same with an advisory. The who, what, where, when has to be high up, and it has to give the information to the reporter as soon as possible. So yesterday we held a news conference on Zoom. We had 12 county executives from every corner of New York State calling for the federal government, our congressional delegation and congressional leaders from across the nation to negotiate a federal stimulus package that provides direct and flexible funding to states and county governments. Okay, that is what is new and what is newsworthy. So we're running out of time in 2020. So we put that in the subject, we put that in the title, and we put that in the first paragraph of our advisories and of our emails, of our press releases. In a release, you want to provide the context of the information, the messages, when we'll talk more about messaging in just a moment. The quotes from the principals, your self or your county chair or your county legislator that you're writing a press release for, a conclusion, and then a close that talks about who you are and what you do, your county and what you do. Some tips on sending releases and advertisers. Don't attach a document in your email. First of all, send them by email, and then don't attach document. Put the text, copy and paste the text directly into an email. The reporters get dozens of press releases each and every day. Some reporters get hundreds of press releases each and every day. They don't want to have to click on open the email and then click on another document to open it to see what it is. They want to be able to see what is new and what is newsworthy right away. Plus, in a time where hacking is more prevalent than ever, they don't want to put their own IT system at risk. Include photos if you have them. Post the release on the website and tweet it after you send it by email. And then if it's important and you really want it in the newspaper the next day, follow up with a phone call to the reporter or the editor. Next slide, please. For press conferences, what we are talking about here in a press event or a press conference, or now we have Zoom events because we can't have in-person physical events for the most part, only social distanced ones. So these are the three options that you have. And you want to package the news as best you can for the reporters and the outlets. What does that mean? In 2005, when NYSAC first did the CAP Medicaid Now campaign, we went to every regional media hub in the state of New York, and we held press conferences, and we worked with the local farm bureaus and the local chambers of commerce. So there was a community connection there. And we would show up at these press conferences with dozens of people from each of those groups, local business people, local farmers, and your county officials all in the same press conference. And so we were able to draw reporters because of that. Do you have video? If you have good solid video, then you're more likely to attract a TV reporter. Do you have audio? If you have good, interesting, unique audio, then you're more likely to attract a radio reporter. If you have audio and video, then you go to TV. And Tom will talk about this in a little bit, but if you're able to capture the audio and video, then you can use that event yourself repurpose that event later on your social media channels. Next, please. Editorials, op-eds, and letters. The newspaper, your daily newspaper and your weekly newspaper will have a page or two and maybe three, depending on the day, devoted to the newspaper's opinion section. And the way to get into the newspaper's opinion section, you have three ways to get in there. A letter to the editor, which you can write, and you can have your neighbors write, or you can have members of your board of supervisors or legislative board write to the newspaper. Those are usually very brief, one issue specific, talking about a specific perspective or point of view on that issue. The newspaper will provide guidelines for the number of words and who to send that letter to the editor to. The same is true for an op-ed or an opinion editorial. They're longer than a letter to the editor, but they're an essay, a persuasive essay that gives your point of view or your county's point of view submitted. Usually it's between 250 to 300 words, depending on the newspaper. And you send that to the editor of the opinion section or editorial pages of the newspaper. And the last thing is to call the editor and ask for an editorial board meeting. And that is, there are several reasons you could do this, or you may want to consider doing this. If the newspaper news is reporting a story from what you feel is an unfair or a particular bias, then you could call the editorial board and say, we would like to come in and set the record straight, or we'd like to tell our side of the story. And an editorial board meeting, usually they will say yes, most of the time. And you go in there and you talk with the editorial section editor, a reporter, and maybe the publisher and the managing editor, depending on how active the publisher is in that newspaper and how active and the managing editor is. And you could have an hour and a half conversation, and then likely a day or two later, there will be an editorial that is written based on the interaction from that editorial board meeting. In 2007, NISAC, after the CapNet Medicaid Now campaign, we turned our attention to waste, fraud, and abuse. And we went to newspapers across the state and we met with their editorial boards to talk about the evidence that we knew was out there in the Medicaid program of waste, fraud, and abuse. And through that, major newspapers from across the state wrote editorials with the information that we provided. Next slide, please. Some general guidelines for good media relations. Media relations is just that. It's about building relationships with your local media, the members of your local media. Get to know the reporters and the media outlets. Where have the reporters worked before they worked at that newspaper or radio or television station? Where did they go to school? What did they study? Are they journalism majors? Are they English majors? Are they political science majors? What beats have they covered before? Are they just on the county or local government beat? Is that all they've covered before? Or have they also done the business, local business beat or anything like that? Get to know them. The more you know about them, the more you can connect with them as individuals, and the easier it is for you to have a good rapport with them, to talk about what your county and what you are doing in your county to help serve local residents. Maintain a good up-to-date list of media contact information. That is not easy. It's depending on the size of your county, particularly. For us, we try to keep a media list of county beat reporters in every county across the state. And there's a lot of churn, there's a lot of turnover for local newspapers and local television broadcast stations and things like that. So that's a constant task for us to keep that contact information up to date. You want their emails, their Twitter handles, their cell phones, and their office phones whenever you can get it. You also want their editors. If you can get their editors' information, you want that too. You want to become the go-to source and expert on all things county government. A couple slides ago, we had a list of things that counties do. There is no reporter out there that can know all that information and be able to report on that information on any given day. So they need help. They need help to tell them what's what about on those issues. And that's where you can come in, or the sources in your county can come in. So you want to either be that source or be able to point to that source for them. Next slide, please. Some more guidelines for good media relations. You want to understand everybody's objective. Everybody in a story has an objective. The managing editor, the reporter, you, other sources that are covered in the story all have a particular point of view, and you should know what that is. If you don't know what that is in any given story, that's a red flag, and you need to figure that out. Shoot straight. I know there's competition among what is the truth and what isn't the truth, but there is an objective truth out there, or there's something close to it, and you should shoot straight with the reporters. Give service. You're a public servant, so what you're telling, the stories you're telling, is about what counties do for the residents of your community. Don't ask for kills. If you think there's a story coming out that might not be great for the county, you don't want to go out on a limb and ask for a kill. You want to provide information that can give a point of view, your county's point of view, but don't ask for a kill. And don't flood the media. Next slide, please. In the interest of time, I know that Tom has a lot to cover here. So message development. At the beginning of this summer, we worked with John Summers from Summer Strategies, and he gave us this tool that we're providing to you now, and we'll provide a handout later on our website. But how to develop your message, your story, and what you want to tell, the story you want to tell to your audiences. First, you have to figure out who your audience is, what the primary, secondary, and tertiary audience. For our Zoom press conference that we had yesterday, our primary audience was the media and the public. Our secondary audience were our congressional delegation, right? So we wanted to connect with our congressional delegation through the media. The third, the tertiary audience was the general public and state lawmakers. Our objective, in a one paragraph, state the objective that you're trying to, you want the audience to remember and you're trying to get across. So our objective yesterday is, we're running out of time. Our counties are out on a limb. They're leading the local response to the pandemic. They're devoting local resources to fighting the pandemic. They've been doing that. They've lost revenue. It's time for our federal partners to come in and help with this emergency through direct and flexible funding for states and local governments. Provide facts to back that up. Next slide, please. Framing the message. You want to make sure that your message is understandable and immediately actionable. What does immediately actionable means? That means when somebody hears your action at your message, they can turn to somebody else and say what that message is. They can report, or they can become the reporters for you. Your audience members live, work, worship, and play in your communities. So when you're developing and putting your messages out there, you want to frame those messages in terms of your neighbors, in your community, in terms of where they work and where they go to church and where they recreate. So previously learned and accepted information affects how receptive people are to new messages. And we're going to delve a little bit more deeply there. But as you put out your message, you want to know that the information a person already have affects how they receive this message. Next slide, please. What does that mean? And this is my last slide and how I'm going to end with you. Side A and side B. If you are not first, you are last, according to Ricky Bobby from Talladega Nights. If you're side A, the first information out there for a reporter or a news outlet tends to be the primary information that is reported and taken up by the audience. That tends to be what the audience remembers and finds most credible. And that information gets firmly lodged in the brain. Side B is any new information that comes along, and that is less likely to get lodged into the brain. Once an audience member hears something, that tends to be the truth, and anything after that tends to be not quite there. It can't be that true. So side A goes first. They define the narrative. They get the prime location in the story. They get the introduction or the lead, and side B comes later and tends to be defensive and less credible to those audiences. Okay, so an example of that is the bully pulpit. The bully pulpit being when you're the president or you're the governor of a state, you get to break the news. You get to hold the press conference. You get to set the stage and set the narrative. And anybody that comes after you is side B. And they have to redefine the narrative. And it's much harder when you're trying to define your narrative or your world or what the county perspective is if that has already been established by who came first, whether that's the governor or the president or your neighbor or somebody on in your community who is complaining about what the county is doing. And that's it for me. I'm now going to turn it over to Tom Oldfather to talk about how to control the media, ways to control the media or control your message through delivering your message on social or new media outlets. Tom, take it away.
Thanks, Mark. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. I'm going to move fast because we want to try to save some time for some questions and respect everybody's time. So buckle up. As Mark alluded to, one of the real beauties of social media is that it enables you to get around the media filter. Mark's been speaking about how best to navigate that world when your message has to be filtered through the media, and press is an incredibly important tool for communicating. But there's other tools at your disposal, and so social media and digital media, new media, enable us to take our message directly to our constituents. And so we're going to touch on social media platforms and then also a little bit on bulk email. Next slide, please. So with social media, we're meeting citizens where they are. And they're already there. About 2/3 of Americans say they occasionally get some news from social media. The percentage of Americans who get their news from television is declining, while it is rising for social media. And social media is also ranked as people's top choice. 34% of people rank social media as their top choice for receiving customer care. That's the private sector, but it also translates to when people are looking for government services. They're increasingly turning to social media. So these people are already here. They're just waiting to hear from us. Who's on social media? Facebook remains the most ubiquitous platform by far. Nearly 70% of adults are on Facebook. Other than the video sharing platform YouTube, which is, I'm not quite categorizing as in the same vein as other social media platforms. Other than YouTube, nobody else is even close, and nobody cracks 40%. 41% of 65-year-olds plus are on Facebook. So it's a common misconception that social media channels are only populated by young people. I think that's changing, has been changing, and here's some data to back that up. That increasingly older Americans are on social media platforms extensively. Primarily, that's on Facebook. Next slide. A couple other stats. Young people are on different social media platforms. 73% of 18 to 24-year-olds are on Snapchat. Additionally, 75% of Americans in this age group are also on Instagram. There's a lot of overlap between those two. Close to half of this group are on Twitter, and though 78% of 18 to 24-year-olds are on Snapchat, That number falls dramatically when we bump up to the age bracket of 25 to 29 and continues to decline. So Snapchat is the most youthful of all these, along with TikTok. And this is important to know because as you're trying to determine how to present this message, it's critical to know what audience you're trying to reach and which platform those audiences are on. So in my opinion, for most government services, most government entities, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and YouTube are your primary vehicles, unless you have like some sort of youth initiative where you're highly targeting your message towards younger users. Next slide. A couple other demographics of note. Pinterest has a large gender gap. It is more popular with women than men, 42 to 15%. And LinkedIn is mostly used by people with college degrees. So once again, if you have specific messages, particular initiatives that are targeted to certain demographic groups like women, or if you're trying to recruit, obviously with LinkedIn, but other initiatives that might be targeted towards people with higher degrees, you might want to utilize these particular social media platforms. Next slide. A note on TikTok, because they were not included in that the 2019 Pew Research Center data that I just was going over. It is the #1 downloaded app of 2020. But the United States represents just 5% of TikTok's global audience. It's a massive global audience that the United States is just beginning to crack into. Is it just young people? At this point, pretty much. You can see the ages there, roughly 69, almost 70% is below the age of 24. 35% of users have participated in a hashtag challenge, which is where, a particular theme, one user challenges multiple users to riff on a certain type of theme. This could be useful for, if you're having youth initiatives where you're trying to engage young people in summer programs, or other types of things. You could consider launching something like a hashtag challenge if you decide to set up a TikTok account. It's also educational videos are starting to gain share on TikTok. It's more than just dancing videos. There is a healthy DIY and educational video community that is beginning to blossom on TikTok. Next slide. So connecting with your audience, the beauty and the curse of social media is that unlike traditional media, which is a one-way endeavor, you speaking to a reporter, that gets broadcast out to the world. That's one direction. Social media goes both ways, and that's primarily in the comments section. So this can be a blessing and a curse, but you can use it to your advantage because it creates this atmosphere where people feel like they're being heard and that they're being engaged with. You want your social media usage to be like a conversation and not just a megaphone. So use that. The best practices here is to engage with your users on topics that matter to them. You'll learn that by what they write in the comments, by what they're tagging. They might be tagging county executives or other county leaders in posts. They'll be giving you hints about what they're interested in. You can use that information to help try to guide your content posting. Try to engage with commenters when you can. Engage with the constructive comments. You don't have to feed the trolls, but if there are people who are asking questions or have constructive comments, engaging with them will increase the engagement ratio of the post, thus elevating it. The social media platforms utilize an algorithm which can tell what posts are getting engagement and which ones aren't. And if it's getting engagement, it'll elevate that in people's feeds and more people will see it. Next slide. Facebook. Well, I'm just going to touch on the big three here. Like I said, it's the most ubiquitous by far. It has powerful live video tools, which I'll cover in a second. Facebook is where you connect with your adult constituents. It's a place for you to tell your county story, to promote photos, videos, positive press coverage of events or initiatives. This is where you want to curate the story of what's going on in your county or your agency or your office, whatever it may be. Another benefit of Facebook as it relates to this is that the turnover of the content is not quite as fast. Like Twitter is constantly, it's the content ages much faster on Twitter, where people will see the same posts, have a chance to see the same post multiple times if they're getting engagement, and they'll hang around on people's feeds longer than on Twitter with Facebook. So the content that you invest time in creating has a better chance of being recirculated to your audience than with it may with Twitter. Next slide. A couple of best practices I'll try to cover quickly here. You want to post daily to keep yourselves up in the algorithm. Post time is not quite so critical. If a post is receiving engagement, the algorithm will show it to your audience regardless of what time it's posted. And whenever your audience logs into Facebook, they'll be presented with content that the algorithm thinks they're going to engage with. So it doesn't matter so much. You don't need to stress too much about timing your Facebook posts. Try to respond to comments honestly and fairly. Here's a big one: is post video natively. Video is becoming a more and more critical part of social media, but Facebook, this is true for Facebook and Twitter, they are competitors of YouTube, so they very intentionally do not get along with each other. So you don't want to share a YouTube link on Facebook. So if you've got a video that you've posted on YouTube, great, but you want to download it to your computer and then upload it natively into Facebook. So you go into Facebook and create a post and upload a video. That way it'll play automatically as people scroll past. It'll just look much better. Facebook intentionally makes YouTube links look unattractive so that they don't want to shift people's eyeballs away from their platform onto YouTube's platform. So always upload your video natively if you can. There's some more best practices. There's a link there for facebook.com/GPA. It's got some helpful government best practices for Facebook. Next slide. Facebook Live, many of you have done a great job with this through the course of the pandemic. Facebook Live really came into its own as traditional press conferences were curtailed. I'll skip through this pretty quickly in the interest of time, but if you go to our YouTube channel, in our webinars playlist, we did a webinar on best practices for hosting Facebook Live events. It's called Effectively Communicating with Your Community Through Facebook Live. You can find that there and give that a watch. It's got lots of helpful tips. Next slide. Twitter. Twitter is a different animal as far as its audience, the people who are on it. 83% of journalists use Twitter. Average Twitter users are younger, wealthier, and more highly educated than the general population. General rule, Twitter is where the elites are, those dreaded elites. You got reporters, politicians, organizations, think tanks, advocacy groups. This is where they live. This is where that narrative gets shaped. So whereas on Facebook, Facebook is a place for you to tell your county's story to your citizens, Twitter is a place where you go to influence the conversation. So where you want to try to tell your story, where it gets picked up by the elites, whether that's reporters or politicians or other influencers and stakeholders. Next slide. A couple of best practices. Since Twitter increased their character count, it's not as much of a thing anymore to use abbreviations and slang like 2 or the number 4 for 4. And you want to try to avoid that kind of stuff at all possible. If you're really running out of characters, try to figure out how you can rewrite your post so that you don't have to use some of those tricks. Try to avoid acronyms. If you get retweeted by an influencer, it's always good to thank them in a follow-up tweet. Once again, post video natively. Twitter is a little better about YouTube links than Facebook, but it looks much better if you post a video directly to Twitter. It does have a 2-minute and 20-second time limit, so you have to cut those down. And then Twitter also has very useful analytics tools, so you can chart what kind of engagement you're getting. Next slide. A couple of things on hashtags. Hashtags are just a way to connect to broader content areas. So for example, COVID-19 or hashtag state of the state, these are ways that you can, if you want to tweet and join the conversation about what people are saying about the state of the state this year, or when the budget gets released, or state of the county, you can put that hashtag on there, and people who are interested in that content can search by that hashtag. So it's a way of sort of sorting information. Next slide. They always start with the #, but they don't work if you have spaces or punctuation. Try not to string too many words together. The best hashtags are short and snappy, like NY County's lead, one that we used this year. You can't make them too specific. It needs to, unless you're launching your own initiative and you're gonna create a lot of content on a hashtag, it's best to try to find one that is widely used, like state of the state or COVID. Something that exists somewhere, and it won't just be something that you're putting out there all on your own. And then also try to limit the number of hashtags you use in a post. If you load up a post with too many of them, it can look a little spammy. Next slide. Fleets. This is a new feature that just launched on November 17th. It is Twitter's push into the Instagram stories and Snapchat sort of market. These are 24-hour posts that disappear after 24 hours. Very similar to Instagram stories, very similar procedure for posting them. You can share text, you can share images or videos, or you can also share, you can share tweets in this format. And the image, I've put the image ratio size there if you want to create your own images like this one here that we created for our federal aid push. Next slide. Metadata. This is really important, but I'm going to go quick. So when you share a link on Twitter or Facebook, it tries to pull this information that you see on the right in the image here, which is an image and a title and a brief description and a link to where this content came from. So this was a press release that we put out. And so when I inputted the link into Twitter, this is the card that Twitter creates. So this is an example of good meta. Next slide. This is an example of bad meta, where you share a link, but it can't find anything to pull. And so you've got this empty space here with a kind of broken picture image. This one does have a title. It's not just the bare link, but it's not nearly as attractive as you want it to be. So when you're sharing content from your own websites, whether that's press releases or pages on your county websites, the ideal is to have it pull some decent looking meta, because your post will get twice as much engagement that way. So talk to your webmaster about how to configure your metadata on Twitter and Facebook. You can reach out to us. We can provide you some links of how to do this yourself. Next slide. A couple of tools to help you see whether or not your meta is working is the Twitter's card validator. These are the links down here, and Facebook, the tool, the Facebook debugger. You can check out those links, and those allow you to test out what the metadata is going to look like. So you can input a link. Here in the example, I pasted in a link to a statement that we put out, and this was the preview that it created for me. And so I could see that our metadata was working. Next slide. These are the sizes for the image cards for Meta. Next slide. There's a couple of examples of ones we did for our podcast and for a webinar. These are images that you have to create yourself if you have a graphics person on staff or just a little bit of know-how on Photoshop or some other kind of photo. And you don't have to have text on these. It could just be a photo. It could have just been a photo of this change here, or a photo of here of Herman Geist. You don't have to do this quite as elaborate of designs if you don't have a graphic artist on staff or somebody that can help with that. Next slide. So if you find that your website doesn't support Meta natively, you can create it on Twitter in a thing called in the Twitter ads section. So you go to Twitter ads, and you have to input a credit card, but don't worry, it won't actually charge you unless you buy ad time, but it just needs to have a credit card on the file. So once you've enabled Twitter ads, you've got a whole suite of tools where you can create these cards. Next slide. And it's really simple. All you do is input an image, a headline, a link to the content that you're trying to link to, and you're basically set. Next slide. And this is what it creates. So here I inputted this image about this webinar we were hosting, the title for it down below, which says Webinar Investing in Green Infrastructure, and then the link to where it went to. here, like I mentioned before with YouTube, you know, I didn't want it to link directly to a YouTube video, so I created this card, which is much more visually appealing than the link would have been on its own. Next slide. Here's some best practices for Instagram. The general gist of it is you just want this to be sort of a more behind the scenes kind of personal experience, very visually compelling. You're not going to be breaking as much hard news here as you would be like on Twitter. Next slide. We'll just, you can come back and check this out later if you want. There's some do's and don'ts for Instagram stories. We'll be posting this webinar on our website. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to keep moving. Next slide. Emergency protocol. This is taken from my best practices for emergency protocol related to acute emergencies like floods or hurricanes or chemical spills. But there is some good material in here as well that could apply to sort of ongoing emergencies like we have with COVID. Basically just want to make sure that you're monitoring your tone, to you know, no humor, sarcasm, jokes, avoid all caps. Also, you don't want to post anything from non-official sources during an emergency. You want to make sure that everything that's coming from your social media accounts is from government accounts, from extremely reputable sources. And then critical at the bottom there is to review your scheduled posts. Anything that you might have already had in the queue, you want to make sure that it's not gonna, you're not gonna have a post that really doesn't jive well with the situation on the ground scheduled that you had scheduled in the past and forgot about. Next slide. Briefly, YouTube. You want to try to, when you upload videos to your YouTube channel, try to make sure you get keywords in the title. When people are searching for videos, they're searching based on keywords, so try to include as many of those in the title as possible. Include tags when you upload, and then also create playlists based on themes from your office. So we have playlists for our webinars, we have playlists from our conferences. These are just ways that you can help your users find the content they're looking for. Next slide. Really briefly on bulk email, this is a great way to get your message out to your users, to your audiences, and go around the media filter. A couple of best practices to build up a list is to create a splash page on your website. Here's an example of one of those that DEC has. Anytime somebody visits DEC for the first time, they're presented with this splash page, which prompts people to sign up for their email list. You can also cross-promote this on all your social channels. Always try to include a call to action or next steps people can take, whether that's, you know, click here to learn more about this, or you know, whatever it may be. Try to when people are done reading the message you present, try to have something for them to do next. Next slide. And here's just one particular template. It doesn't work for everything. It doesn't. This excludes newsletter type bulk emails. You know, newsletters are their own creature, but if you're not doing a newsletter, it's best to try to keep bulk emails to like one topic, one message, one thought, and one action that you want your audience to take away from it. And here is it's a helpful template. It's not, you know, this is not set in stone, but it's a nice way to break this up, where you have a quick, very brief intro, call to action, more information, repeat the call to action, and then done. So. Okay, I think that's all I've got, Jeanette. Sorry that was fast, but I just wanted to make sure we had left some time for people to ask questions if they had any.
Well, thanks again, folks. Thank you to our panelists, Tom O'Father and Dr. Mark Levine from the NISAC communications staff. Fabulous presentations. We have a few questions. Why don't we take them, and then we'll call it a day here. Just want to ask the first question here is about most stakeholders within the county understand the need for social media, but they don't know how to set up a system that can benefit the public and also be controlled by internal communication professionals. Do you have any suggested resources for government, quote unquote, social media policies, unquote?
Yeah, you definitely want to review some of these with your with your counsel about as it relates to what is okay to delete or take down if a post becomes overrun with trolls. I know those are important policies that have to be tailored to each particular organization in line with whatever your records allow. And then as far as empowering your staff, you basically just have to pick a few key staff that are trusted with these social media logins and empower them to be able to log in and create content as it happens, when it's pertinent. I know that can be a little frightening to have multiple users with the login credentials to, let's say, your county's Twitter account. But the immediacy of social media at times does require that various communication staff have access to that and be able to respond to whether it's questions coming into your, if you're getting tagged on Twitter with questions from reporters or direct messages or questions being asked on Facebook. You want your staff to be able to respond to those if they require immediate response, or if news is breaking at a strange time of the day, as Mark alluded to with the side A, side B, you want to be able to respond quickly and get in there with your portion of side A, a quick response before a narrative starts to harden. I don't know if that answers the question, but.
And Tom, I'd also like to interject. The Center for Technology in Government, ctg.albany.edu, has some resources available on their website. They have some reports on social media that include a page of social media policies from local governments from across the nation. In addition to that, if you contact one of us after this presentation, we will connect you with some social media policies that other counties have created and deployed in their communities.
Okay, thank you. Next question we have is, how aware should communication professionals be about putting out content that could affect long-term SEO? Do you have tips for releasing timely messages that won't give a topic, location, entity a negative view in search results after the content becomes outdated?
I think you'd want to maintain a pretty, a robust system for pulling down outdated content. If you've got old stuff on your website, you just want to occasionally do an inventory of all your various pages and try to ensure that what you've got is up to date. I know there's a site that I used to use called Site Improve, SITEIMPROVE, Site Improve. And that was a service that you paid for, but you could set it up to do this however often you wanted, but it would crawl your website and check for broken links, check for misspellings, and other key things that get flagged and reduce search engine optimization, and it can hurt your overall SEO score. So that might be a solution. There are other companies too. That's just the only one I'm familiar with.
Okay. Last question for Dr. Levine. How tips, suggestions for communicating technical issues and simplifying them for the public? Oftentimes, counties are involved with an alphabet soup of federal or state or local acronyms or large programs, health, human service related programs, or highway related programs. Tips on how to simplify messaging with technical programs.
That is a great question, Steve, and we have to be vigilant about that every day as county communicators, because there are so many acronyms and some of our programs are so difficult to explain. How early intervention works, how preschool special education works, how the funding formula for Medicaid works, the difference between Medicaid and Medicare. These are things that most of our neighbors don't understand, but we have to do the best we can to boil this language down. Keep it simple. Stupid is something that we talk about internally all the time. The KISS method. Before you put out a press release, a message, an email, or a post, read it or read it aloud and pretend that you're talking to your grandmother or your mother or your neighbor, and will they understand what you're talking about? And that is one way to keep it simple. That is one way to make sure the complex stories that we sometimes have to tell are understandable to the general public and to the audiences that we are pointing to. We're often talking to state lawmakers who are getting emails and getting inundated with meetings and phone calls from an array of constituents. They don't know everything that a county does, and they sometimes, we need to explain to them some very technical information, and we have to do the best we can upfront to provide it in a simple way, and then provide follow-up details with more complexity. But that the information that gets sent originally has to be as simple and straightforward as possible. As they get more knowledge about a situation or a program, then you can start to use some of the jargon and they will understand that. But that is a one-on-one situation. When you're mass communicating or communicating to multiple people at once, you want to keep it as simple as possible.
Okay, thank you. Last question for both of you is if you could read out your telephone number and provide an email for folks to contact you.
It's Mark Levine. It's 518-465-1473, extension 206. It's my office line. Cell 518-429-0189. Email mlavigne@nisac.org. And we are here to help. So any questions you might have, any advice you need, anything like that, call, text, or email anytime. Thanks. Tom.
Okay, Tom?
Yeah, also you can visit nisac.org/staff. It's nisac.org/staff. There's contact information for all the staff here. My email is toldfather, TOLDFATHER @nisac.org. And my phone number is 518-465-1473. That's our main NISAC office line. My extension is 229. It's extension 229.
Okay, that'll conclude today's presentation. I want to thank both of our panelists and encourage everyone to have a happy and healthy holiday season. Thanks so much for joining us today.